Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Traci Harrison. I am the Associate Director of Admissions, and I have with me Scarlett Blevins, who is the Director of our Financial Aid Office. We're so glad that you all could join us today for us to go over FAFSA and answer any questions that you all might have. We do have a lot of information that we will go over, and at the end we will go through a video tutorial of what the FAFSA will actually look like as you're filling it out. Please note that this is being recorded and we will be sharing this recording afterwards, so don't worry if you don't catch all of the information that is provided today. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Scarlett.
Good afternoon, everybody. Like Traci said, we're going to start with a PowerPoint to go over the FAFSA and a lot of information, and then at the end we'll go through a little video and I'll kind of narrate that video for you all to kind of see what the FAFSA actually looks like, and then we'll have time for questions to open it up so we get as many questions answered as we can. And I think we collected the Traci has collected some questions already that you all may have put in your application to sign up for the webinar, so we'll go through some of those as well. Okay, so this first slide, of course, is talking about what a FAFSA stands for. It's Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This collects the demographic and financial information from the student and the family. The information is used to calculate the expected family contribution, or EFC. The EFC is the amount of money a student and his or her family may reasonably be expected to contribute towards the cost of a student's education for an academic year. Now, depending on the school, it doesn't always match what the amount of money you're asked to pay out of pocket on the EFC. So that's different with each school, but each school will have be given the same EFC when you submit the FAFSA. And then like what we use to offer financial aid. The application is available in English or Spanish versions. And the FAFSA, it may be filled out at any time during an academic year, no earlier than October 1st prior to the academic year for which the student requests aid. For the 21-22 academic year, you can begin filing as early as yesterday for the 21-22 academic year. Some colleges will set FAFSA priority dates, and that may or may not impact the amount of financial aid that a student receives. Again, that's different with different schools. So if you're looking at several different ones, you might want to make sure that you know what their priority deadlines are to get that filed. There are several different ways to collect the information. What we're going to be talking about mostly today is the FAFSA on the web, because that's the most used, the most popular way of using it. There's also a My FAFSA via the My Student Aid mobile app. So now there's a mobile app you can use to file a FAFSA from your mobile device. You can still complete a paper request form. To request a paper FAFSA, you would call 1-800-4-FED-AID, and we can give you all this information. Like Traci said, it's being recorded. So you don't have to write down these phone numbers. Or you can download it at studentaid.gov for a paper FAFSA. There's also an option to do a FAFSA on the phone if you have limited or no internet access. Again, you would contact the 1-800-4-FED-AID number to get that information. And then us as college or financial aid administrators, we have the option to submit FAFSAs as well. So there's several different options there. But like I said, we will focus on the FAFSA on the web today. And some of the benefits of using the FAFSA on the web or the My Student Aid mobile app, there's built-in edits to prevent costly errors. So that speeds up the process, so you're not submitting information and then the college that you're interested in has to come back and ask for information to kind of slow down the process. There's skip logic that allows students and or parents to skip unnecessary questions. So as you fill it out, if there's depending on the amount of income you listed, for instance, it may or may not ask you to list assets and things like that. There's a threshold for that. And there's also an option to use the IRS data retrieval tool to import tax return data. Again, that speeds up the process for the financial aid office to review the information and know that it's accurate. some other benefits. There's a more timely submission of the original application and any necessary corrections. More detailed instructions and help for common questions. There's ability to check application status online. And there's a simplified application process in the future. There's an option to pre-fill certain information on the FAFSA when completing the application for subsequent years. On the FAFSA on the web, this slide is showing you how to get to that. So from the studentaid.gov homepage, the FAFSA application can be accessed through the Apply for Aid tab that's circled there on the slide. Select complete the FAFSA form from the drop-down box. New applications for the 21-22 year are completed in the new to the FAFSA process option by selecting the Start Here button. On October 1st of this year, they'll offer the option to complete either the 2021 FAFSA or the 21-22 FAFSA. So right now, what you're looking at for next year, you want to make sure that you're filling out the 21-22 FAFSA, not the 2021 at this point in time. So always make sure you're filling out for the upcoming year, not the previous year when you go in there to complete a FAFSA. And then once you get to the login page, it does give an option to list it if you're the student or another individual. So a lot of times parents will click on, so a parent can start the FAFSA for the student on there. So there's a couple of different options there because they know that a lot of parents are going to do that for the student probably initially anyway. So where we talked about earlier about the IRS data retrieval tool, or the DRT, you'll hear students or financial aid offices refer to that as the DRT. So that's what they're talking about when they're talking about the data retrieval tool through the IRS. It allows for certain tax return information to be transferred from the IRS database. Participation is voluntary, and tax filers can choose whether to transfer the data to the FAFSA on the web when completing the FAFSA. If the IRS data retrieval tool is selected, the student and or parent will be directed to the IRS website to provide information to retrieve the tax information. The IRS will authenticate the taxpayer's identity for you. So if they find a record, the IRS is going to transfer that tax information to the Department of Education to populate the various FAFSA fields. Some of the following information, if they have it, will be transferred is the parent student's filing status, their tax return filing status, the adjusted gross income, income earned from work, income taxes paid, education credits, untaxed pensions, untaxed IRA distributions, tax exempt interest income, IRA deductions, and the status of an amended tax return. This reduces the documents requested by the financial aid office if the student is selected for verification. And we'll talk about that at the end a little bit on what the verification process is. So since it's, it also expedites the process at the school. So because we're not asking for as much information initially, that tends to, especially for our office, get offers out a lot faster. So, and the way it works is you're using 2019 information, so you should have already filed your taxes at the time that you file for the 21-22 academic year. There are certain tax filers that cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool, and they're listed there on the slide. So if there's something that applies to you, see on that slide, you're not going to be given the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So for instance, so if a parent is married at the time the FAFSA is filed, but taxes are filed separately for any reason, both spouses' information will be needed to combine to answer certain FAFSA questions correctly, but you can't use the DRT to pull that information. And normally, if you have any questions, if you get in there and you want to use it but can't, you can contact our office and we can kind of give you a little more information as to why maybe you can't transfer the data. So another piece of the FAFSA and filling it out, you have to create what's called an FSA ID. and it's used for the FAFSA completion and allows access to certain U.S. Department of Education websites. It may be used by the student and parents throughout the financial aid process, including subsequent school years. Students will need their FSA ID to complete loan applications. If the parents choose to do a parent loan for the student on their behalf, this parent would have to have an FSA ID for that as well. Parent also needs an FSA ID to be able to electronically sign the FAFSA form. So this is important to note, that each parent and student need to create their own FSA ID. It's the legal signature, of course, should not be shared with anyone else. And you can apply for that through the fsaid.ed.gov website, or when you get into the FAFSA, it'll give you an option to create an FSA ID when you get to that FAFSA website. And one of the other things, and this is something that we may be able to send to all our participants today, is a copy of this FAFSA on the web worksheet. That's really good. It gives you a preview of questions that may be asked regarding the basic information, and that kind of gives you I have some families that they'll fill it out, and then they'll sit by the computer and go by that, and it's a little bit easier. So we'll try to get the copy of this out to all the participants, because it does help let you know exactly what kind of information you're going to need when you sit down at the computer to complete the FAFSA. There's some student general information that's going to be expected that you should have when you're ready to complete the FAFSA. You need a student social security number, their citizenship status, their marital status. There is a question on the FAFSA of drug convictions of the possession or sale for students, and they have to answer that question to be eligible for federal aid. The selective service registration, males are required to register with selective service in order to receive federal financial aid. And then it's also going to ask for the highest education level completed by the biological parents, and that's collected for demographic purposes. A couple of things to note on this general information it's asking for: when you fill out the FAFSA and they ask for the student's name, you want to make sure that you're putting the student name that's on their social security card. If you use nicknames or anything like that, it's going to delay the processing, because what they do is they send that information to the Social Security Administration and confirm the identity of the student. So if you put a nickname in there instead of the first name, it's going to reject it for you. And like in our office, if we have those rejects, we're going to reach out to you and let you know that that reject is there on the FAFSA so that you can correct it. I think most schools will do that. So if anything is amiss, they will reach out to you and let you know. It's going to also verify the student's citizenship status, but it does not for the parents, because the parents do not need to be U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens for the students to be eligible for federal aid. So they only verify the student's citizenship status. And again, if there's any issues with that citizenship status, our office will reach out to you all to let you know what we need to resolve that. So some of the other questions on the FAFSA is talking about the student dependency status. It's going to ask questions to determine a student's dependency status for federal or Title IV aid purposes, not for IRS purposes. So a dependent student can be different than for the IRS, what you can count as a dependent on your tax returns. That's different. So of the questions that students are presented, if they answer no to all of the questions, then the student is dependent and must provide the parent information. If they answer yes to any of the questions, the student is considered independent. Now, some schools will reach out if a student answers yes to any of those questions, other than maybe being married or their date, how old they are. Most offices will reach out and just confirm that that status was correct. There's a lot of times students will accidentally hit yes when they should have hit no, so we always double check that. So for Title IV federal financial aid purposes, there's some notes on the dependency status. If a student's considered dependent, and they may have a single parent or two married biological parents, adoptive parents are treated just like biological parents. A step parent is considered a parent if married to a biological or adoptive parent. and if the dependent student counts in the household size. If a student and parents are divorced and are completing the FAFSA has remarried, then the step parent's income and asset information must be reported on the FAFSA. And also, biological or adoptive parents who are unmarried but living together should both list their income on the FAFSA as well. Grandparents, foster parents, or legal guardians are not considered parents for the purpose of completing the FAFSA unless they've legally adopted the student. So those are some things to keep in mind. We also will talk about special circumstances. So usually if students are in guardianship or they have foster parents, something like that, they would fall under the special circumstance. And just real quick, I'll go over some of the things that would make a student independent. They'd have to be 24 years of age by December 1st of the award year. If they're an orphan or ward of the court, they're considered independent. If they're emancipated minor in the student's state of legal residence, they're considered independent. If they're an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or at risk for homelessness and self-supporting, they could possibly be considered independent. The student is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, if they're active duty armed forces. A graduate student would be considered independent. So once you receive the undergraduate, you're automatically considered a graduate student, you're automatically considered independent. If the student has legal dependents other than a spouse or has legal dependent children. And then there's also documentation of other unusual circumstances demonstrating independence that you could provide to the financial aid office. If you feel you can't answer yes to any of these, but there are circumstances that you feel like you should be able to, that's when you would contact our office and we would start the process of kind of seeing what we would be able to do for you. So some of the information about students of dependent information, so parents, as we talked before, the data retrieval tool will get the tax, income, and most other financial information. Parents are expected to answer a dislocated worker status, and there's a checkbox to indicate that. And the criteria for that can be found on where the question appears on the FAFSA form. So if you're not sure what that is, there'll be a definition when you complete the FAFSA form. There's a receipt of means tested federal benefits in the previous 2 years it asks for. So it'll ask if you've received Medicaid or SSI, free or reduced price lunches, temporary assistance for needy families, or the supplemental nutrition assistance program. So I'll ask those questions as well. Based on the responses to these previous questions, the parents may be asked to provide more information about their assets. The asset data may include current balance of cash savings and checking accounts, net worth of investments, and the net worth of certain businesses and investment farms. Now, another thing to note, the value of a 529 college savings plan in either the parent's or the student's name is reported as an asset of the parent for students that are dependent. Other untaxed income, this may include payments to tax-deferred pensions, savings plans, child support received, clergy or military housing allowances. The FAFSA will ask for that information as well. Some of the things you would not report as an asset on the FAFSA would be your family's home. A family-owned and controlled small business with 100 or fewer full-time employees is not listed, should not be reported on the FAFSA. You do want to report the asset value as of the day you submitted the FAFSA. And asset information can't normally be updated, but again, special circumstance may allow us to do that on a case-by-case basis. So that's something that you would just contact our office if you had any questions about that. And then the student, and if they are independent and married, their spouse information would need to be included. So again, it's the same information as for the parents. So they'll be asking that information. And again, if the student is married, they would be considered independent. So they would need spouse in place of parent information on that. Some additional information that the FAFSA will ask for, that's going to ask for college information. You can list up to 10 colleges to receive your FAFSA information. If you're using the paper FAFSA, however, you can only list 4 colleges. So there's another benefit to using the FAFSA on the web, as you can list more colleges if you need to. You will also, you can go in and search the school code, so you don't have to know the school code before you start the process either. And it'll ask for housing plans at each college, because the schools like our office, when that information is input, that's what we use to determine calculating the financial aid package as well, with what your housing plans are. And then if for some reason you pay to prepare a fee to help fill out the application, you would list that information there. Most places, you're going to find places, the high school guidance office, our financial aid office, you really should never have to pay to get the FAFSA submitted. So that's going to be a rare instance on that. But we do have some families that would prefer their accountant to do it, so they have them prepare it. But most of the time, you would not need to pay for somebody to file the FAFSA for you. There are signatures required on the FAFSA. The student, of course, would have to file, and then one parent for dependent students. And there's 3 different ways to provide a signature for the FAFSA. You can do it electronically using the FSA ID. You can print off a signature page and mail it in, or if you do a paper FAFSA, you would sign the paper FAFSA and mail it in. Now, if you mail in the signature page, it does delay the process a little bit, but again, most schools, we will reach out to students if we get a FAFSA that says there's no signatures on it, and we can help you expedite that a little bit. But that's another benefit to you doing electronic signature, is it gets to us a lot faster on that. Some of the frequent FAFSA errors, one of the big ones, of course, is students inputting their social security number wrong. That'll reject, because again, it goes to the Social Security Administration to match up name, date of birth, and social security number. So if that's a mismatch, it won't send us a valid FAFSA. Some of the others is knowing the correct way to put the parent information on there. Parents are remarried, of course, it's the parent and the step parent. If parents are divorced, you do fill out the FAFSA, the marital status, based on your current status, even though you're looking at 2019 information. A parent and student would list their current marital status when they complete the FAFSA as of the date they filed the FAFSA. Parents putting in the wrong income on the FAFSA, listing the wrong amount of untaxed income. There's times that we have students that list income under untaxed and income earned and taxable income. That's going to really skew the FAFSA, and it's really going to affect how much financial aid you're going to get. So if we see anything that looks amiss on that as well, we'll reach out to you and kind of question that if we feel like you've put something that's going to hurt. And when we calculate the financial aid package based on this, the household size is sometimes something that is not put in correctly. The members in college. Now, for a dependent student, that does not count a parent that's in college. You would not list 2 in college if it was the student and the parent in college. So that's one of some mistake that happens quite frequently. And then if you list the real estate or investment net worth. So for instance, if you were to list your official retirement investments on there, that's going to skew the FAFSA. You don't have to list that on there. So you would not list the equity in the family's primary residence either. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the assets that are identified in the instructions. Again, there's going to be a help screen on the side there that you can see what should be counted under assets. So it'll help you with that, because like I said, it's really going to skew what you're eligible for if some of those errors are put on the FAFSA. So what happens with the FAFSA processing, it goes to CPS, which we call, it's the Central Processing Center. It sends the results of the FAFSA to the student as well as the school listed on the FAFSA. And it's going to include the student's EFC, which is the same for all. It's sent to all schools, and that will be the same for all schools. Messages related to any database match issues. So if, for instance, they can't confirm your citizenship status, it's going to show on the results that you get that there's an issue there. It's going to show if you're selected for verification. And again, we'll have a slide at the end that talks a little bit more about verification. And then it's going to tell you, kind of give you an idea of your eligibility for Title IV funds. So if based on your EFC, you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, it's going to tell you that. It's also going to give you an idea of how much loans you can borrow in that student's first year. So then what the school, we receive the information electronically, and we will call that, it's an institutional student information record for us, or an ISER. So if you can't tell, financial aid's big on these mnemonics. Everything's abbreviated, and so you'll hear, you know, financial aid offices refer to a lot of these mnemonics. So that way you kind of know what that's going to be. And then if you provided a valid email address on the FAFSA, the student's going to get an email notification of the student aid report processing, and you can see what it looks like on the screen. If for some reason you didn't provide an email address, they will mail you a copy of that to the address on file. So you will get it either way. Again, the email notification, if you make sure you put a valid email in there, because you're going to be able to make corrections. You can make a shareable file if you need to share it with, for scholarship reasons. You know, if you apply for an outside scholarship, you can then share that information with them. You can view your FAFSA transaction history. So if you get it mailed to you, you can't do any of that. You can't make the corrections or anything on that with the mailing. So again, it's important to put a valid email address on there so it makes it a little bit more efficient for you if you need to make corrections or anything. This is a sample of what the school sees. So it's really different from what you all are looking at. But a lot of times we're just pulling it into our system where we can read that. There may be additional information that we need. There's sometimes that schools may ask for proof that a sibling is enrolled in college, or proof of high school completion, or documentation of untaxed income. So there may be things that you've listed on the FAFSA, but if a school's asking for that information, it's usually just to confirm or verify what we get on that student aid report is accurate. If we're tasked with making sure that everything looks right for you, because we want to make sure it's fair when everything's evaluated and make sure things are right. So even though you may have listed that on there, the reason the school's asking for that information is to clarify and make sure that everything's accurate on there. If you're making corrections, again, that can be used on the FSA on the web. The student has the FSA ID. Of course, they can log back in there. If you have a paper student aid report, you can update it and mail it in. Again, it's going to take longer to do that. But also you can submit the documentation to the college's financial aid office. So we can input that information as well. Normally what we do is if we need anything, we'll ask you for that information, but reach out to us first for the corrections, and then we can see what we need to help make those corrections for you if need be. And here we talked about a little bit earlier, special circumstances. What this is, okay, there we go. On the conditions that exist that cannot be documented with the FAFSA. What you need to do is, if you feel like there needs to be more explanation than what the FAFSA can provide, you need to send a written explanation and documentation to the college's financial aid office. The college will review it and possibly request additional information if necessary. What the Department of Education allows for the schools to make with special circumstances, we consider a professional judgment. As the financial aid professional, we can make adjustments to the FAFSA if we deem it necessary. So those decisions are final. The Department of Ed lets the schools make that decision, and they don't take any appeals on that if you feel like that the decision that the school made is not what you think it should be. So and then some examples of special circumstances you think about, because again, you're looking at income information from almost 2 years ago by the time school starts, because you're looking at 19 tax information. So you're may see a lot of changes in 2 years. So some of the examples are, of course, a change in income, including a loss of employment, a change in employment status. We've seen a lot with COVID. We have some families that will their hours have been cut back. We've seen a lot of that this year and in unemployment. So if a parent goes from full-time to part-time for some reason, those are things we can look at. Unusual medical bills not covered by insurance. That's a big one sometimes because some, and it's unexpected. A lot of times you're not expecting your medical bills, and that usually occurs. Hopefully, if any, maybe once when a student's in school. Hopefully that wouldn't happen a whole lot. Changing the parent's marital status. You do file the FAFSA as of that day that you file, but there could be, again, instances that parents separate. We can take that into account in circumstances. Unusual dependent care expenses. And then if the student is unable to provide parental information due to a parent being incarcerated, an abusive situation, or no relationship with parents, that's one too. So really with the special circumstances, the more we know about your situation, the better we can help. So anytime you think that the FAFSA is not portraying an accurate picture of your finances, talk to us. We can't always guarantee we can make any changes or make any adjustments, but we'll certainly look at that and make sure we've reviewed and done everything we can to help. And then here's some useful information that has our school code listed. We have a cost calculator as well that you can go in now and actually kind of estimate the student's merit scholarships and need-based aid as well. Again, it's not exact, it's an estimate, but it kind of gives you an idea maybe when you're going into it. It'll ask some of the similar questions that the FAFSA asks for. And then earlier we talked about being selected for verification. And if you are, again, it'll be showing on the student aid report. What schools will have to then ask for is sometimes the copies of parents' W-2s, a tax return transcript, and you can get that at irs.gov. Again, we can help you with requesting that as far as the instructions on that. A verification worksheet, and that collects the demographic and the household information. And then there may be other documentations or proof of income as well. And then there's also, we don't see it as much, but sometimes it'll ask for us to verify the student's high school completion or their identity. So again, our office reaches out to the students with anything we need to get on that. So anything we need in the verification process, we'll reach out and let you know exactly what we need from you. So that's the end of this portion of it. And I think what we're going to do is go through really quickly. It's about a 10-minute video that kind of shows you the steps of the FAFSA. So we'll go through that. Next here, let's see. Okay, can everybody see that it's the login to the FAFSA and can hear me still? Okay.
Yeah, it's up there.
Okay. And as you can see on this login page, when you go to the studentaid.gov site, it's going to ask for the student's username and password. Again, it allows you to create one if you already have it. Of course, you just input it. And it has the forget username or password. I will say sometimes it's hard if you forget a username or password to get that reset. So make sure you remember that. We see a lot of families that struggle with that. And this is a demo site, so it's going to be a little bit different. And in order to get back in your FAFSA, you create a save key. So it's different than your password. So that saves if you can't go back and completely submit the FAFSA you're working on right now. That'll allow you to go back into where you stopped. And this is kind of lets you see what kind of information is needed. You can click on those different ones to see if you want to get started on that. So your FAFSA ID and password is tied to your name. So that's going to be input. Your date of birth and social security number will be input for you. It's going to ask for an email address, and that's where you would get your student aid report sent once it's been submitted and processed. And it's going to pop in your address from the FSA ID information. Of course, and then it asks for your citizenship status. And it's going to ask if you're working on your bachelor's or master's. It's going to ask if you've had a first bachelor's degree before, and then it's going to ask for your grade level. And then this asks for your work study. If you're interested in work study, that lets students know. There's a gender. And then if you have driver's license, that's one that can be skipped. It's not required if there's a student doesn't have one. It's asking if you're in a foster system. It also collects parents' high school completion right here. Now here it's going to ask for your high school name. And you can see here in the video, it was a little hiccup on that. So you may find that when you're searching for the school name. But you want to confirm it. And this is where I had the hiccup because it didn't save the high school for me, so I had to do it over. So make sure you hit select when you go up there to search, and you'll see that this time. Okay. And here in this case, we knew the school code. So this is where you put in your school codes, and you can do a search and you can add more than one. I just did one for demonstration purposes, of course. And here's where you put the housing plans. And it's going to start again. You see the student information up there. It's always going to ask for the student information first, and then the parent demographics later. And this is where it starts with the dependency questions. And that's still more dependency questions. And here it allows for you to click on a special circumstance if you need to, and that allows the school to know that you're going to submit some information. And now we're going to the parent information, so it's going to ask the marital status and the date of the marital status. And you have to put in the parent social, last name, first initial, date of birth. It does do a match on the social security number and date of birth, so it'll give you a mismatch if you put that information in. If you key it in wrong for any reason. So, and on here too, if for some reason the parent's not a U.S. citizen or doesn't have a social security number, you can put all zeros in the social security input field. And here's where it tells you about household size, and it gives you the definition of who to list in there. So initially it's going to assume, of course, 2 parents and then yourself. So then you just go over the definitions of that, and then you list any additional people in the household. And then now it's going to the parent's tax information. It does ask for the parent tax information before it does the student. So just make sure you're aware when you look up there, it says parent or student. When you're doing this to the link to the IRS, you've got to put the parent's FSA ID and password in. And once you do that, it'll take you out of the FAFSA screen into the IRS.gov screen. So I didn't show that because I didn't have a parent FSA ID for this demo. But there will be a step if you do that takes you out to the IRS, and it'll ask a few questions. Now, the information that it transfers back in is going to be masked. You're not going to see what that is to look at. So I would recommend just going in there. If you do the DRT tool, just leave it as is. You'll see that then when you get the student aid report, you should be able to see what information was input there. Just asking for taxes paid. Again, it gives you the line items that it needs to put that information in if for some reason you don't use the DRT. And there's some asset information. And that's continuing with the asset information. And here it'll ask if it exceeds, your assets exceed a certain amount. If it's below that, they won't ask. As I put no, it didn't ask for any questions there. Now it's going back to the student tax information. Again, you can use the data retrieval tool for the student as well. And it's going to ask for the same information it asked from the parents. The majority of the time with students, they're just going to have, if they worked a summer job or something, they'll have income from work, but usually not a lot of information here. It does ask for the student's cash savings and checking, any investments or family business. That's usually, of course, 0. And it doesn't like that I put the parents making the exact same income, which, you know, most likely it's not going to be exactly. It'll let you check for errors. To get past this, I just updated that information. But again, you're going to pull that from your W-2s, and you shouldn't have errors like this. But that does show you, it does give you the information pretty easy. And then you click check for errors, and it should go on past this. And here's where you'd sign and submit. So it's going to give you a kind of a summary of what you filled out. So if you need to, you can go back and edit it before you actually submit or do an electronic signature on that. And then again, it's going to ask for a student and signature needed for student and parent. I couldn't, because of the demo, I couldn't go all through everything. But it allows you to do that, and then you can sign it electronically with the FSA username or password. So in this demo, I had to actually go in and say that I was going to submit with no signatures. But this will show you the other ways that you can, so other options to sign. So you can do electronically, print a signature page, or submit without signatures. I just did that for demonstration purposes. What if you did that and sent that, what you're going to find, the school's going to get a rejected FAFSA, so we're not going to see an EFC. So that kind of shows you, you can see here, it gives you your EFC and things like that. You can print that page so that you have that confirmation on there. And that's kind of the flow through it. Of course, it'll take a little bit longer because you need to look at taxes and things. The IRS step will take a little bit longer to verify all that information. But again, if you can get that on there, that makes things a whole lot easier for the school and for you to make things a little bit faster if you can do the data retrieval tool. So.
Thank you, Scarlett. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen to bring up our office's contact information if after this Anyone is welcome to reach out either to the admissions office, to myself, to the financial aid office, to Scarlett. And let me go ahead and we will start going through questions. I have answered some as we have went along, but there are some that I did not know the answer to. So let me start at the very top. So the first one, yes. Do you recommend using the IRS data retrieval tool? Absolutely. If you can use that tool, I always highly recommend to use it because it's going to save time. It's going to save time from sitting there with your tax return sitting in front of you and individually filling out all the lines. So if you are able to use the retrieval tool, absolutely use it. Scarlett, there was a couple of questions regarding signing up for selective service because a lot of the students right now that would be filing their FAFSAs have not turned 18 yet.
Okay. On the FAFSA, and that's one thing it didn't show in that demo, but it'll ask, I think because I clicked female, but if I had clicked male, it's going to give you either an option to say you're already registered. And of course, if you're not 18, it does give an option that FAFSA will register the student once they turn 18. And then that'll come to the school saying that we're going to get them registered. So that kind of clears that, that requirement for us initially too. So it does give you an option that they'll actually register for selective service for you when you turn 18.
Is there any advantage to using the student or the parent of a student option when you're first getting ready to log in and you either check that you're the student or you're the parent?
I would always suggest maybe going in as the student because it requires the FSA username and password. If you go in as a parent, it'll let you put in the student's social, date of birth, name. It'll let you get all the way to the end. You're ready to either do the data retrieval tool or the signature, and you don't have your FSA ID created yet. So just to keep that headache from getting all the way through it and then be like, oh, I've got to do the FSA ID. So I would recommend always having the FSA username and password of the student to log in. It just makes it a little bit easier and a little less frustrating if you get in there and you know, get to that point and then you have to go back and create that username and password.
I had several people asking if they need to include in their assets their 401k, IRA, pensions. Is there a list in FAFSA that actually tells you what assets that you do need to include in there?
Yes, when you go in there, it should be, I think, orange or blue that you can click on the definition of what assets are. But normally you don't list any of your official retirement. So through your work or anything, any of the 401ks and things like that, you don't list. But there is, when you go into the FAFSA, you can click on it and it'll list exactly what you need to input and what you can leave out.
Right. If parents are divorced and child lives 50-50 with each, which parent do you use? Which parent's information do you use?
Normally, you know, of course, if they're 50-50, usually it's the parent they live with the most. If that's split equally, then it's the parent that supports them the most. If that's split equally, then you all can kind of make that decision on that. So it's usually the parent that they live with or the most support. So if you can't determine that and it's, you know, right equal, then you can make that decision.
And kind of the same question is, you know, with biological parent and a step parent, yes, you're going to use the tax return that the student is claimed as a dependent on your tax return. So if it's a parent and a step parent, but you both claim them on the tax return as a dependent, then that would be the tax return that you use. Okay, and a little bit of clarification on who, as far as students that are eligible to file FAFSA, being a U.S. citizen, dual enroll, or dual citizen, or if they have a green card.
Yeah, so permanent residents have a green card can file and be eligible for federal aid. there are some other instances. Again, what they do is they'll do a match with immigration. So you'll know when you get the student aid report if there's any issue with that. That does ask for the A number from the green card if you're an eligible non-citizen. And they'll reach out. We'll know too if there's any issue, and we'll reach out normally if they can't confirm your U.S. citizenship. What we see that a lot on, if students, they were adopted from another country and they have their birth certificate, but a lot of times it'll flag them that they couldn't confirm they were a U.S. citizen. We get the naturalization papers or the birth certificate, and that takes care of it. That takes that flag off of there for the student. So most schools will see that, and they'll reach out if there's any issue on the citizenship status. But green card holders and U.S. citizens are definitely eligible for federal aid.
And one that I can answer, so once you actually have submitted your FAFSA, you can go back in and make corrections. If when you're first initially filling it out and the student does not know what colleges they want the FAFSA to be sent to, they can go back in. Again, you can go ahead and fill it out and submit it and start it, but then you can also go back in and add the colleges as they make that decision. Just make sure that when you do make changes that you go all the way through to make sure that everything is saved and that it submits, and that it makes sure that it submits all that information to the colleges that are listed. Do you have to list post 9/11 GI Bill info?
No, it does ask for military housing allowance on the FAFSA for untaxed income, but you wouldn't have to list those benefits on there, because the post 9/11 is normally to cover tuition, so you wouldn't list anything, any types of grants or scholarships on there that goes towards tuition or direct costs. So.
And where do you get the FSA ID?
If you go to, it's fsaid.ed.gov. You could go directly there and apply for the FSA IDs for the student and parent.
For assets, do we just add them and give a total, or do we need to upload account information?
No, it's just going to have one field, so you list a total. It does break up investments versus business assets. So,
All right. Scarlett, what was the FSA webpage again? I'm going to type it out.
fsaid.ed.gov.
If I file a paper tax return, can I link it to the IRS retrieval tool?
Yes. Because they basically, it comes out of their database, so everything's input in their database, even if it's a paper form. So you can access the DRT with that.
You can list any college on the FAFSA that you want to receive your FAFSA information. You do not have to be accepted to that college yet. You don't even have to have had a application started with the college. And I think it allows up to, does it have a limit? It used to. Does it have, I think it's 4.
It's 4 on the paper, but you can do up to 10 on the web now.
Okay. Yep. That's good. It used to be only like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But yes, so you can list any college you want to send the FAFSA information to. It does not have to be a college that you've started an application or have been accepted to. Do you have to include military retirement pay as income or disability pay?
No, the only would be like if you had a private disability, like if you get the disability, Social Security disability benefits, any type of retirement pay from the military, that's not listed. So if you had a private company that you had some disability pay, that's normally counted, but not any federal money.
Do you need to fill out a FAFSA form for each child? Yes.
And you do have after you submit one, it does give you the option to say, do you want to transfer this information to a new FAFSA for different students? So it does save some time when you do a second one if you do it at the same time.
So if anybody else has any questions, I made it to the bottom. And I'm looking through questions that were submitted prior to today. Okay, there was one, and this is probably going to be like on a college basis, but the question had come from one of our RSVP forms. Can FAFSA pay for apartments versus dorms? And that's going to be on a school basis on if you have funds, if you have leftover funds from the financial aid that you've received, you can use that in excess, but I don't think it is anything that there is aid available that is specifically for paying non-direct costs from a college. Am I right? Am I correct in that, Scarlett?
Right. Like for us, again, you take enough loans to cover those types of things, but we do include in a cost of attendance for a student off-campus housing as well. So most schools do that, so that if you take up enough loans and things like that, you can have that refunded back to you to pay rent and things like that for off-campus housing. So it's possible. But again, it's school by school basis. Yeah.
Custodian counts for other children? Or does that still fall under assets for parents?
Like for foster children, something like that, I guess is, you wouldn't necessarily have to list that either.
Okay.
Now, if it's, you know, if it's taxable income, of course, that would show up on the tax return. So,
it may have to elaborate on that question. Military retirement is submitted to the IRS on returns. How would it be excluded if you do the data retrieval tool?
okay. If it's taxable income, it would be on, it would be included then. So if it listed as taxable, so if there was any untaxed, like the military housing is the only thing you list as untaxed income. So if it is taxable and it's on the return, so you don't necessarily report it separately, but if it is taxable income, then that's included in that, in the FAFSA calculation. But if there's any untaxed income, you wouldn't, except for military, except for the housing allowance.
What if the child applies to more than 10 colleges? How do you get the FAFSA information to the additional colleges?
I think you can call the phone number for FAFSA, the 1-800-4-FED-AID, and add that. Like for us as a school, we can, if we have a DRN number from the student aid report, we can add a school. But if you already have 10 schools, we can't take one off. So normally you have to take one off, or you can call that the 1-800-4-FED-AID number and see if they can get another one added for you.
For work study, I always recommend checking that work study box, even if the student doesn't know if they're going to use it, but it is just good to see, because the financial aid office will actually put on their award letter, if they check that box, if they're eligible for it. So then that is just a good thing to have in the back of your mind, knowing that it is there if you were wanting to take advantage of that. Do you remember that work study is not instant funds taken off the bottom line of the tuition bill from the institution? That is income earned by the student for a student employment job that they work on campus. So getting the FSA ID, yes, you want to do that before you go into FAFSA, because that's the ID you're going to need to use for FAFSA to verify your social and all of that good information. So you do want to get that ID first and then go file your FAFSA. All right, so I got for the one, so you it was for siblings. So if there are siblings of the student that is filing FAFSA, do you need to include the accounts for those siblings or just for the parent? So if it's like a younger sibling that has like a savings account in their name.
No, you just use the student that's filing the FAFSA and the parent information. So sibling information would not be on the FAFSA. If they have their own savings or checking account, it would not be listed.
All right. And I think that's all of our questions. Thank you all so much for your thank yous. I know this was a lot of information, but like I said, that's one of the reasons why this is being recorded. So you can go back and review it. Again, you are always more than welcome to reach out to Scarlett or myself with any questions in regards to financial aid or anything Emory and Henry specific. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening and hope everyone has a good evening and a great weekend.